Welcome to another episode of AEC Tech Conversations. In construction, we spend a lot of time talking about what's new tools, new technologies, new ways of working. But at the same time, some of the most interesting work happening right now doesn't feel entirely new. It feels like a return to older materials, older methods, and a different relationship to the craft. And what's interesting is it's not happening instead of technology, it's happening alongside it. So today I want to explore that intersection. What happens when modern technology meets traditional ways of building? Are we actually innovating or are we rediscovering something we've known for a long time? And in the process of optimizing everything over the years, efficiency, scale, and predictability, is there anything that we may have lost because we're now trying to bring it back? When you look at the industry where it's heading, it's not just about what we can build, it's about how we build it, the materials we choose, the processes we use, and the level of human connection we have to the work itself. Today, I'm joined by Dan Marty and Matt McMahon from Snøhetta to explore what that might mean for the future of construction. So, welcome, both of you. Glad to have you here.
Good to be
Great
here.
to be here.
Thanks both for being here. Do you want to take a minute and tell me about Snøhetta and then also a little bit about each of yourselves?
Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, my name is Matt McMahon. I'm a director at Snøhetta, and Dan and I are working out of the New York office in Brooklyn. The practice got going in 1999 when a group of young designers submitted a design for the Library of Alexandria in Egypt. And the competition was anonymous, and it was a mix of architects and landscape architects that contributed to the design. And against all odds, they won, and not only won, but built a practice around that commission. And so I've been practicing with the studio for about 12 years now, and I lead the Theodore Roosevelt Presidential Library among some other projects. And I've worked closely with Dan on a variety of efforts in the studio.
And I'm Dan Marty. I'm a senior project architect at Snøhetta. I've been at the firm for about 8 years now. Recently completed the Joslin Art Museum in Omaha a couple of years ago, and I've been working to complete the Teddy Roosevelt Library come July 4th this year.
Drew you both towards the architecture side of things. I'm always curious what leads people into this industry.
Oh, man. I feel like, I think it was my experience with some buildings in Cincinnati. I grew up in Ohio. One of my kind of favorite places to be was at Union Terminal, which is like an old Art Deco, beautiful train station that they turned into a like kids natural history museum. And that now like the Justice League uses as their Hall of Justice. So it's cool. Like this, both in the cartoons and the new movies. So it was kind of a thing of inspiration for me, kind of being around like this kind of old, kind of Americana design that kind of drew me in.
I found, I had a love for the outdoors and nature specifically. I really wasn't sure how I would translate that into a discipline or a career. And I went to Penn State University, and it's a big school. So if I didn't have a degree that kind of fit my interests and ability, it was going to be my problem because they had so many things. One of the great programs that they offer there is a Bachelor's of Landscape Architecture degree, which is not the most common degree for a school to have. And I fell in love with it. The idea that our landscapes, that the buildings set within the cities, parks, gardens, were actually designed things was sort of a fascinating idea to me. And it opened up me to the world of design. And then many years later, after practicing landscape design in New York City and collaborating with architects on pure structures and buildings and things that weren't proper ground, I decided to pursue architecture, which then kind of led me ultimately to practicing at Snøhetta, where all of those things come together.
I think landscape architecture is one of those things you don't really notice until you take it away. And then you really notice it. But I think when it's done really well, like it stands out even when you're not necessarily paying attention to it. My wife always makes fun of me for walking into buildings and looking up at the lights to see what the lights look like. And I'm sure you guys have a similar experience with landscape architecture. So how do you think the relationship today between traditional building methods, crafts, and modern technology works?
Well, I think part of our practice is centered on collaboration. And collaboration, as Dan and I have been saying, around disciplines and people from different backgrounds and working in different mediums coming together to pursue a single project, not separate portions of projects, but one unified way of thinking about it. So, and collaboration relies heavily on traditional methods. So we have a model shop in every one of our studios. Those model shops aren't used to produce finished models that then say kind of what happened and here's the project. The model shops are a tool to collaborate with one another and with clients and with other outside consultants like engineers to come up with the project and kind of capture ideas, solicit imagination, and foster a dialogue. In a similar vein, I think hand drawing is really critical. Again, we're not drawing on Mylar to make technical drawings, but we are having trace paper and overlays and sketching through ideas together. Those traditional ways of design are, I think, fundamental to connecting with people and collaborating. They're for clients that might not have done a design project before. They're sort of these invitations in that are maybe a little less intimidating than, say, a technical drawing or a finished rendering drawing. And so for us, I think central to our working method in terms of tradition is these like processes that have been with the design industries for a very, very long time, and bringing them into our studio today to allow for that collaborative technique to occur.
Yeah, I think one of the things I've noticed that's happened is we just assume that people are looking at a Revit model. And so the idea of coordination has completely gone away. And I think we miss out a lot in the design process by not sitting down and talking to each other and coordinating in person. It feels like a bit of a lost art with the technology because it is so easy to say, well, just go look at my model. And, now there's not an opportunity to have a discussion about it.
Yeah, the other aspect to that, there's a ton of information that you can gather online through different representations of a place, right? But to actually walk it and feel it with your senses, and then to invite others to walk it with you, I think is also a really important traditional way of working that is critical to our technique. If you want to create a sort of a tailored landscape or a building to a place, part of the responsibility of the designer is to get to know the place in a way that maybe is beyond the distance that you get from working through a computer. It's actually a tactile, sensory-driven, experience-based understanding of place, and then the people that live there. So it's not just sort of terrain and views and ecology and weather. It's also the energy that people carry that have been living there for generations and kind of what their experience of those places are and how they see it. So I think part of just getting out of the studio and into the world and with others is a big part of what I would describe as sort of a traditional method of practice that we're bringing into our work today.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's important too, because we get used to looking at plans and we have learned what different things on plans mean, but most people don't interact with plans very often. And so when they're trying to figure out what something's actually going to look like, having that tactile experience can be really important. So when you look at what's happening in the industry right now, does it feel more like we're innovating, or are we rediscovering some things that we might have already known?
Yeah, I mean, I think it feels more like a rediscovery or reintervention, might be a more honest framing. I think there's this sort of kind of post-digital sensibility emerging in both architecture and construction, where the obsession over like the new is sort of giving way to something that might be more interesting and more tactile, that engage in both history, craft, and the human experience. And I think the technology, the computer, stops being the point and more of like the means to get to where we want to go a lot of the times. And I think in some of our recent projects, like the Teddy Roosevelt with the rammed earth, you really see that. You see like kind of the imprint of the craft that is left behind of the people into the wall itself.
I think that what Dan is saying around, the imprint of craft or like into the project itself is, I think, really key. So in the same way that we try to bring others into our design process, the act of making the work itself is, I think, an extension of that into construction.
Mm-hmm.
I think we have these shade sculptures at the Blanton Museum of Art in Austin, Texas, and they're deeply coordinated technically through digital modeling techniques and testing perforation patterns. They're basically these like climatological structures that create shade and shadow and light experiences on the grounds. And they also offer this identity to the museum as a welcoming place to enter into as a cultural destination for the region of around Austin. But as I was saying, that these shade sculptures were highly designed through digital techniques and highly complex perforation patterns that we tested in the computer. We did shadow testing kind of to envision what they would do and how they would perform on the grounds. But they also were tested on a brownstone in Brooklyn that was around the same height, where we punched out the perf patterns on a pieces of plywood, held them down with paint cans so they cantilevered off the edge of the roof, and then cast shadow onto the sidewalk below. And those were just as, I think, informative to the design process. And I would say pretty innovative, actually, then feed back into the digital platforms that we were using. So I think if there's this question of innovation, one of the things I think that our practice does is kind of play back and forth between like analog methods and maybe bodily experiential sensorial methods and fold that back into our design software to come up with some pretty innovative approaches.
Yeah, I've seen a couple of examples just from getting to know you guys a little bit. It's pretty neat, some of the things you guys do. I wish I had a little more opportunity as an electrical engineer to play around with things and figure out what's going to happen. There's not quite as many opportunities to get creative, but maybe with lighting.
Yeah, lighting is a big part. I mean, we deeply care about the way that your body feels light and shadow and feels day and night. And so we were very thoughtful and try to be very careful around how the project's illuminated as well. Sometimes that means like allowing places of darkness so that you really feel it, and then having other areas where the pools of light emerge. And those are the centers of activity. So certainly on the Roosevelt Library that Dan mentioned, the night sky is a key part of it, getting to look at the constellations and the atmospheric effects of, the night sky is a really big part of how we're imagining the project to perform over the course of the day.
Yeah, this reminds me of a project we recently completed, the Joslin Art Museum. We have skylights in the galleries in that project. And between the baffles and the skylight, there is sort of a light mixing chamber that is different sizes based on the shape of the building. And what that allows us to do is use electrical lighting to kind of even out the different lighting levels within the gallery. So kind of mix that natural and daylight. So the museum can kind of turn that up and down how they want, or they can kind of I think one of the coolest parts about that building is like in the gallery, when you're surrounded by white walls and art, you can like feel when a cloud goes over you. And you have that like sensorial change of what is happening outside in a very kind of protected art space.
Yeah, it's neat. Technology is blended with the human experience, right, of the space. And we wouldn't be able to do that without certain technologies, but yeah, really driven by the human experience. So as an industry, we are always searching for what's the most scalable thing, what's the most efficient thing to do, where can we create predictability? What do you think's allowed us to do that well? And then where might we have gotten lost a little bit with that drive for efficiency along the way? And so I think we've made some progress there in terms of creating predictability, creating scalability in some of our designs. But I'm curious, what do you think's allowed us to do that well? And then is there anything that you think we've lost in this search for efficiency? Like I work on projects quite regularly, and I feel like we have tried to push how fast we can turn around a project. And there's efficiency in that. The owner saves money by our fees being less and, having less design iteration. But I feel like a design iteration does at times have a negative impact on the outcome of the design, and not being able to take the time that I think is warranted to think through different decisions. We're often just going, and making decision without really stopping and thinking about, is that the best decision? So I guess that's kind of where I came up with the question from.
I would say, if there's something we've lost as a set of design disciplines, it's, I think, the wedding of craft to the design process. So, a couple of centuries ago or a century and a half ago, if you looked at the drawings that were being used to deliver buildings or landscapes, there's a lot less information included. And, there's a lot of reasons why things have gone the way that they've gone. But I think part of the work that we're trying to do is to weave craft into the design process. And that takes, like, to your point, Jeff, that takes time. It also takes some anticipation of how you make time within a project design process and a procurement process. So, for instance, we're wrapping up work on a pedestrian bridge in upstate New York for Watkins Glen. And this is a place where, like, the Civilian Conservation Corps had done all of these incredible stonework trails and pathways and tunnels that kind of wind their way up through this gorge where there's 17 and more waterfalls. And so craft is, like, really front of mind on it. And one of the things that we realized early on is that this bridge would need to be prefabricated because it needed to drop down into the gorge as one piece. And so much of the design of the bridge was thinking about the craft of it and how it gets delivered on a truck and then is sent to the site, and then how it gets lowered into place. And all of that construction intelligence from the end of the project had to be brought forward into the beginning of it, which I think, it's a very small project compared to maybe a more complex building, but working to find the ways to kind of take craft and assembly and installation and bring that forward into the beginning of a design process allows you to do more things. And then it also helps you to tell the story. So, the tabs on the bridge that are going to be holding the guardrails are also the pick points that the crane will use to pick the bridge up off of the truck and drop it into place. And so there's a narrative description that we're trying to achieve through the built work itself that tells the story of how we're actively trying to re-wed, I think, craft and installation into the life of the design. That's not easy to do, and it takes a bit of forethought and wisdom with the players involved at the beginning of a project to be able to do that. But that's, like, one example of, I think, something that maybe has been lost that we're trying to recover.
That's a good example.
Yeah. I was thinking about the ramp walls that you had mentioned earlier as well.
Oh, right. Yeah. Yes. Especially with the Randorth walls, I think a lot of this is sort of managing risk, where if somebody has never done it before, there's a lot of risk and there's a lot of money associated with that. Right. And with the Randorth wall at Teddy Roosevelt, that was something that nobody had really done out in North Dakota before, or at least recently.
Yeah.
But I guarantee after we did it, it's going to be a lot cheaper for the next person. So I think at Snøhetta, a lot of times we get the best of both worlds, where there's a lot of inefficiencies in the beginning of experimentation and trying to figure out the right thing that leads to efficiencies later. Okay. I'm also thinking about the Joslin Art Museum. We had these sort of folded UHPC panels up on the facade, and we had just so many failed tests in the beginning, trying to get those panels to stay together and stack right. But once we finally got it together, those things just started flying out of the factory. And I know that factory learned a lot, and we learned a lot through that process. So a lot of times I think we get to be, and we're in a very lucky position to be kind of trailblazers for people that come after us.
Yeah. So I work with people in our industry a lot around the idea of fear. And I don't think most of us would say, right, that fear is driving our decisions and whatnot, but it's really good at manipulating us at a subconscious level. And when you're talking about doing something that you haven't done before, your body is fighting that hard. And so, you really do have to take these baby steps to try to help people work their way out of that comfort zone and want to try something new.
I think I love that as an idea, because I think the other that is amazing that it happens is when you get the right mix of people together, the engineers, the contractors, the clients that want to do it, and they have reasons they want to do it, and designers. The fear is there at the beginning, but then as you start to, like, incrementally solve the problem, that fear gets replaced by excitement and wonder, and, like, I say pride within just the way that we are working, and pride in the act of making something together. And so I think that on every project that we have, there's usually there's always a few things that, like, people are nervous about materially and in the design part of it. And then as you start to work through it, it becomes exciting. And then at the end, it's this feeling of, like, collective achievement that you have, that I think in the life of the work, it's like that excitement and the nervousness that turns into excitement gets wedded into, or, like, baked into the project. And it's part of the energy of an ambitious work of design. So I think that for us is, like, being careful about where there is risk, like that Dan was describing, and where there's fear, and then being specific about, okay, these are the things that are really novel, and then developing a process to work through them with everyone so that that fear turns into part of the excitement of the project.
When you talk about craft, right, and the craft of what you all do, is that how you would define it? Is these ideas you've learned to help people embrace new things and kind of at the intersection of technology and physical interaction with what you're doing? Or how would you define craft?
I think that's a really interesting question because I think certainly designers, like architects and landscape architects, we have to be good at a lot of different things.
Yeah,
Then,
especially managing us engineers.
yeah, each of us have to be specialized. We end up being specialized and really good at certain things, right? But in general, as disciplines, we have to be kind of generalists to be able to navigate complex processes and but also technically be proficient, handle risk, cost, schedule, all of these people. And I think for the craft of being a designer does, I think for me at least, it embraces the human side of it, where you're kind of thinking about how do all these people connect to this project, and how over the life of a project can we make this sort of, can a community emerge around the process that is embracing the work so that when it's open, it's just beginning, right? And
Yeah.
so for me, I think definitely part of my craft as a leader is to help connect with people and manage risk and also manage the design process and make sure there's space within that design process for creativity and the full potential of the project to emerge. And so certainly, and then you give space within that room for some of the careful things that Dan's been talking around the rammed earth at the Roosevelt Library, or the facade at Jocelyn, or the Bridget Watkins Glen, making room within the process for physical craft to also have a place.
Yeah, I think intentionality is, I think, one of the key words here, because I think it's so easy to get stuck in the tool that you know, and you have the tool guiding you. And now the tool is guiding the design versus you're guiding the design. So it's really important to like recognize when that's happening and when you need to pivot. When you need to pivot from, okay, this thing really isn't happening in Rhino. I need to like cut some cardboard in the model shop and like think about this in a brand new way. I think that's really embedded in how Snøhetta works and where and how we break out of ruts in the design process.
We've talked a little bit about how technology supports this, but what are some of the ways that you all have found technology to be the most helpful?
Well, there's certainly things that, like the solar studies that we were doing for the Blanton Museum of Art, that it gives us a whole nother level of confidence to understand what it's going to be like. And there's like this uncanny thing that happens. You get through design development. There's another round of renderings that go out based on the digital understanding of the project, and they come back, and then the thing gets built and it's pretty close to what the built condition is. So there is this specificity that we can kind of get to through the digital platforms that allow us to have levels of confidence that I don't think previous generations had. That's not just sort of in the aesthetics of the design, it's also in the engineering of it. So the solar gain, wind studies on the Roosevelt Library really allowed us to kind of understand how the building's going to perform across the seasons during different wind conditions. It also opens up chances to push things. So at the Blanton Museum of Art, the gardens sometimes sneak in underneath the building, ways that we had the confidence to do because we knew what the solar gain would be, not only from the sky and from the shadow of the structures, but also through these complex perforation patterns that I've been talking about. So it gives you a little bit more ability to push boundaries. And I think structurally, that happens as well. Like the Watkins Glen Bridge is extremely efficient. It's a 46-foot long steel cantilevered span. And because there's a really clear understanding with the structural engineer on how it is going to perform, it becomes highly refined. And so I think that's one way, is like kind of pushing the limits of design and taking on things that with less knowledge and less certainty you wouldn't have done.
Yeah. Yeah. I think from an engineering perspective, it's allowed us to right size things a little bit better too, not have as much engineering fudge factor built into how things get sized. So have a little more comfortability with what's actually going to happen, just like you were saying.
I think it's also helped us make right decisions earlier on. Like there's always space for, a wind consultant or a solar environmental consultant to do these really granular studies. But I think what I've seen recently is more tools that have put, I guess, simpler diagnostic programs in our hands, in architects' hands, so we can make, like shading and sun decisions earlier on and with less rework later on. That especially happened in Teddy Roosevelt.
Yeah. I'm always a big fan of walking through a building once it's opened and kind of, especially schools. There's nothing more fun for me than walking through a school and seeing elementary school kids really excited about where they're going to be able to learn and this level of excitement that's just in the air. So when our projects are more visible and more hands-on, how do you think that changes the experience for the people who are designing them and then potentially occupying the building at a future date?
I think there's a connect. I think people are on their screens so much, and this idea of distraction and our attention and where you are when you're in a place. I think it's an issue at like a kitchen table or you in your home, all the way up to the collective spaces of our cities and our parks and our landscapes. And I think that the work that we do inherently is about getting people to be present where they are in the world, whether that's in a garden in Texas or at the opera in Oslo or at any one of the libraries we've designed, is trying to make spaces that kind of grab your attention, but like assert themselves in a way that invite you to kind of ponder and maybe behave a little differently or can cognitively be aware in a slightly different way. It's kind of heightening your body's visual, all of your senses. And I think that that's what we, at the core of the practice, it's like one of the goals, that it's hard to describe. But if you've been to one of our projects, I think it tries to awaken people in ways. And I think when you're in that space of being comfortable, but also slightly challenged, it's like, this is not a normal place to be in. It also opens you up to connect in a different way. So connecting to the ecology of a place, connecting to your fellow people that are there, or to the ideas that the institution or the space is representing. And so for me, like, I think that the question's pretty profound, Jeff, like how you connect people in a world that is inherently trying to compete for their attention and to compete for connections, I think is kind of how I see this and in the work that we do.
Yeah, the more you can get people to put down their screens and look up, right, the more you create opportunity for connection, which is really what being a person's all about.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a lot about kind of these kind of unexpected moments that we talked about, whether it's being in a gallery and experiencing a cloud, when you can't see the sky, or walking into the building and seeing like earth stacked in front of you. And like your first instinct is to like hug it, or, I was at Omaha recently and there is this art piece on the ground that's also kind of a water sculpture that wasn't really used before, or not used, but wasn't really interacted with all that much because it was in the middle and our building kind of hugs it. And what I was struck by is just kids sprinting through this water feature, which should not really be touched because it's technically art, but it was just amazing to see this thing being interacted with in a very new way because of how something was cited. And I think our projects try to do that in all the various types of ways.
Oh, yeah, that's the funnest part of it for me, is seeing how people end up interacting with the building. And yeah, a good building can have a big impact on people.
Yeah.
Or a good environment can have a big impact on people too. So, last question: as technology continues to evolve and progress, what do you hope that we hold on to or even bring back in that we may have lost into what we do?
I would say, we've talked a lot about process and craft. I would hope that we deepen the design discipline's relationship to craftspeople and to labor and like who's making the work, and trying to enrich the skill of making things. And I think there's real risk, every generation that goes by, skill is something that's passed down. It's like, I'm working on an old house myself, and I realize like how unskilled I truly am. Every day I try to put something together. I think that every generation that goes by, the generation can either enhance the skill that's there, or the skill that's held collectively by craftspeople is dwindles even further. And so I think that I hope that the work that we are doing is actively investing in the trades and pushing to expand and deepen their abilities. And so I would hope that in the future we really do that more and find more ways that more people get involved with the act of making. And so that, I think, my hope, Jeff, and for the future of our work.
Yeah, I really like that. How about you, Dan?
I think technology at its best helps us communicate and see ourselves better. And I think what Matt is talking about is something I've been thinking about a lot, about skills being passed down. Like, this is maybe an aside, but my grandmother used to be able to just like drive in a car, look out the window and be like, oh, that's a grape leaf. I'm going to go get that grape leaf and pick it. And like now that, and make some tomatas out of it. And now that skill is like not in my family anymore. And I hope that technology can help us kind of both rediscover some of these things that have been lost through family and through tradition, and kind of bring back in kind of new and innovative ways. And I think the Rammed Earth Wall is a great example of that. Like, I hope to see more of that skill deployed throughout the country.
Yeah. Both really good answers. I like that. Well, if you're excited to hear more, I am. Dan and Matt are both doing a keynote at AECTechCon in May in St. Louis, and I know I'm excited to see it. But if this conversation resonated with you, I'd encourage you to join us at AECTechCon and continue it in person. And you can learn more and register using the link in the description. And thank you both for being guests, and thanks everybody for listening.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you. Looking forward to May.